Imagine creating beautiful boxes just like these. Well, you can, and it's much easier than you think. Gifkins Dovetail manufactures the easiest jig on the market. It's the only Australian-made dovetail jig. It's so simple to use and cuts precise joints every time. There's no measuring, no fiddling, and no fuss. We even offer box making courses to suit all levels. And of course, every purchase comes with our after-sales service. So explore our website to see the Gifkins jig and so much.
Good morning all, Cole here. How are we all doing today? It's wet and ordinary here in Coffs Harbour, but we always need the rain. And it looks a bit like it's wet in Western Australia as well. But anyway, we're dry, we're in the shed, we're working. So it's all going to be good today. Now, today's going to be fairly full on. So you'll have to bear with me. So we're going to go through a whole lot of different little things. At the end of it, I hope at the end of the day, we should be able to cut ourselves a test joint. But we've got to go through a whole lot of processes. People were asking over the last few weeks to do a little bit of timber prep. I've done some of the prep beforehand because it means I have to organise a few different machines. So I've done all the machinery work. What I'm going to do is show you how to cut the timber to size. But also before that, I'm going to talk about the timber. So some of the things that we're going to talk about: different types of timber, what the best cuts are. We talk about thicknesses. We're going to have a little chat about purchasing timber as well. Different sanding techniques. So we're going to have a little bit of a look at that. Different cutting techniques and accuracy. So there's some of the things that we're going to go through, but each one has its own little peculiarity. That's the word I usually try to avoid. Tongue-tied. So anyway, we'll give it a go. So the first thing we want to do is have a look at what we're going to do. So the process that we're doing at the moment is we're going to start by building ourselves what we call an uneven-sided box. Now, the uneven-sided box has a different technique to the technique that I used when I built the even-sided box. And I don't have one here, so I can't show you that. But this is what we call uneven sides. The uneven sides is where we have, I'll go on to here, the front and the back are a different height to the two sides. You can see that like so. Different technique used on the jig, and we'll go through that when we get to it. The idea is so that the lid will fit nice and neatly between the two ends. So that's where we're going to go with this. Now, one of the things that we'll do, the box will take a very short period of time to build. So once we get all that sort of thing started, I'm going to go over doing feet again, putting trenches in and so forth, and that will happen with most of the boxes that we do, so that you get a bit of an idea and it's revision from the time before. So we'll do that a little bit for each of the boxes. What we're going to do is we're going to, with this one here, we're going to do a number of different types of lids. So that will take us a few weeks, of course. So the standard basic lid that most people find quite easy to do and very simple to do is just a straight piece of timber. Now this one here is a lovely piece of silver ash, and really, really nice piece of timber. So all that is cut to size and fitted. But there are peculiarities with cutting a piece of timber like this that we need to sort of look at, and we'll deal with that down the track as well. So having a simple lid like that will simplify your box making and make things easy. So we'll go straight from that, straight into making a single lid. And of course we're going to put a little keeper on it as well. So we'll sort that and we'll make that box just like so, right? Now, when we get into different sizes of things of boxes, we start, I'll go back to the lid bit a bit. We're going to make a frame and panel lid as well. Okay, this one here is mitered. You can tongue and groove them. You can do all sorts of different things to build these lids. This one's just a frame with a panel in it. And then we get into the little bit more elaborate ones where we have the frame exactly the same as that other box with butterflies that hold it together. But the beauty about this one is if you have a look at the lid, you'll see I have a lining around the outside of it. So it's really a cute little box. So we're going to do a little bit of that as well. So we sort that out. Now when it comes to cutting the sizes, the different size boxes depend on what you want the box for. So this is my standard size box. This one here is what we call a document box, and you can see that it's very low and quite large. It's about the same size as an A4 piece of paper. So those of you who are getting married, you could probably put your wedding certificate in there, and then when you have children, you can put your birth certificate in there, and when you have a divorce, you can put the divorce papers in there too, so you can keep the whole lot together. That's a joke. Anyway. No, it's not. This one here, you'll notice the difference with this one is I've got a little chain that actually holds it in place. Sometimes that's a nice little feature, it depends on what you like. The hinges on this one here are standard butt hinges. The hinges on these boxes, on this one particularly here, is what we call a stop hinge. Don't need a little keeper on it. And it stops at 91 degrees, and as you can see when you look at it this way, you can see that the lid is open. Let's get that down where you can see it. The lid opens out to 91 degrees, okay? Or a little bit more maybe, but anyway. And then we go into some more elaborate little boxes, and this one here you can see is a little bit smaller than all of the others. But the other thing that I've done with this one, if you have a real close look, you can see I've actually carved it, put a little carving on there. Sometimes that is necessary to enhance the box a little bit. I just did it as an exercise. It's just a leaf, but it makes the box quite pretty. And again, it's exactly the same technique. Smaller hinges, smaller box. All the techniques that I used to build this box are the same as I did to build that box and that box. There's another feature that you'll have a look at here too. This one here has H10. This is the smaller version of our jigs, of our templates. This is the H10. So the material in the box is actually quite thin, less than 10 millimeters, so that I can get a good cut on there. So that also makes it look quite nice. More like a hand-cut dovetail. So lots of different things that you can do with the boxes. And once you get the box built, then you start to play with all sorts of other things. And we may even get to do this as well. When you open this box has a sliding tray in it. The tray built with the same technique with H10 dovetails. And then to support the tray, we have the support, and you'll notice that dovetails there as well. Okay, so that just sits nice and neatly into there.
It's a sweet box.
And that goes on, the tray goes in there, and as you can see, it gives you a nice separation of the box. Now, when you have a look at this box, you'll also notice that I've used a fancy bit of material. This is bird's eye lace she-oak from Western Australia. Really rare, really hard to find. And I've also used it in the keeper. This one here, again, This is just straight lace she oak. It's not bird's eye, but it's lace she oak. And see, you can see it's quite pretty. And the colours tend to sort of match the rest of the box. You'll look at that around there. So trying to match up your colours, and that's something we're going to talk about in a little bit. This one here, just a piece of silky oak, a large piece. I was doing this box as an exercise, but you'll also notice I have an inlay around the inside of the box there that almost matches the colours, and as it's aged and faded, it's blended in, and you really have to look hard to see it. It's the same timber as we've got here, which is a little bit of forest oak. So we've got lots of different types of timbers, and you can enhance the boxes just by having a little play with your colour combinations and your timber combinations. So let's get all this stuff out of the way. I want to talk about selecting timber for the boxes. When you select the timbers, I constantly hear people who talk to me about timbers, and they're struggling with cutting joints and getting things correct. The two things that I hear most is, I'm just going to use a piece of scrap. That sort of doesn't work with me. Basic, because scrap is scrap. And the cheaper timbers, cuts of timber, like radiata pine, tend not to work very well when you start to use better quality timbers. So if you're cutting a box out of, say for argument's sake, rose mahogany and silver ash, and you do a test joint with a piece of radiata, the density of those timbers is nothing like what you're going to be working with. So your best bet is to use timber that you're going to be cutting for the box. So choose some timber. Now you can buy cheaper timbers to start with. You'll notice this little box here. It's still a cute little box. It's only half finished, of course, but camphor laurel and silky oak. And it will give you a really nice result. If you look at this box here, different types of silky oak. So they do come up quite nice. It just happens that I've added rose mahogany to that one. So the better quality timbers, and camphor, people say, oh, it's a weed. Yep, it was a weed, but it's been taken off the weed list, I believe. And you can buy some really good quality timber. So I would suggest that get away from the cheaper cuts timber, or not the cheaper cuts timber, but get away from radiata and deal with timber that's going to look relatively nice. You're going to get a good result. If you damage a little piece, yeah, the price is very negligible between radiata and some of the softer timbers that you can buy. So get some good quality timber to start all your work. The other end of the scale is people using hardwoods. When you start on hardwoods, you're battling against a very dense material to begin with. So break it down and get away from the harder timbers. And the harder timbers, Tassie oak, any of the eucalypts, stay away from them for the beginning. You can go to them later down the track, but stay away from them in the beginning. Go to the softer timbers, but relatively good quality softer timbers. Now, when we talk about quality timbers, I'm going to show you some timber that I've got here. And there are various different things. Now, learning about the timbers, the only way to learn about them is listen to what people say to you about the timbers, and then go and use it and have a little play with it. And you'll find that eventually you're going to work out some of the do's and don'ts with different types of timbers. Some splinter, some are brittle, some are soft and furry. There's lots of different things, and not only the cutting of the tools and things like that, but the finishing. As we explained last week, your finishing is going to be the best bit, so you need to sort of think about that as well. So there's a lot to think about. So let me show you this timber. So the timber that I'm showing you there, I've just got a whole heap in front of the wall here. People say to me, where can I get good timber? You can buy, if you Google some of the furniture grade timber suppliers, you'll find that in some areas, you'll find that there's plenty of them around. I know there's a couple in Sydney, there's a couple down Wollongong, there's some up in Queensland. I'm not going to give you any of the names, but if you just Google them, you can call up those people and you can get relatively good timber relatively cheaply. If you look here, what I've got here, I've got some hardwoods and some softwoods. This is Sydney blue gum. It's a eucalypt, and you can see it has sap pockets. It has different grain colours, and it's generally a relatively stable timber. But it's hard, so we stay away from that in the beginning. Everybody raves about Tassie Blackwood. This is Tassie Blackwood. You can see by the colour on it, this is what it's called, is being back sawn. You can see that it's got lots of grain, and it comes in lots of different shapes and sizes, and it comes in different colours. So when we think about the colours of our boxes, we think about what we're going to use. So we have various different types of blackwood. Now blackwood again is brittle. For box making, it's probably a little bit harder than we need to start with. You can go to that later on the track, but the problem with blackwood is that it is full of silica, and silica tends to take the edge off your tools. So it'll take all the edge off your sharp tools, like your saws and your router bits and so forth. So we generally stay away from that one as well. Now some of the ones that I like to sort of start with, now Western Red Cedar, you'll find it in lots of houses as window frames and all sorts of things like that, and it's really stable. It's very light, easy to work with, and you'll notice that in some of the boxes that I've shown you in the past, I've got cedar framework and cedar bases, and that's because it is really nice to work with. It's quite difficult sometimes when you're turning it, but it does, as you can see with that piece there, nice straight clean grain, which indicates that it's quarter sawn. I'm going to talk about quarter sawing in a minute. Camphor laurel comes in lots of different colours. You can see it's gradient. You can use this side of it or that side of it, whichever side you like the colour to be in it. So, and it's quite nice. Tassie myrtle, which is another one. This one here happens to be back sawn. You can see the grain showing up. And then we get into some of the lighter stuff. The coachwood. Coachwood, well maligned timber, but it very quite good and quite pretty when you add it to other timbers. Again, silky oak, and even one that, this is golden cypress from, I think this is New Guinea timber, but it's golden cypress. There's plenty of it about, and you can see the grain is nice and straight. So you've got a fair range of timbers there, and I carry these anyway. But when we get into the really nice timbers, there's New Guinea rosewood, which is another one, and you can see that if you put that beside that, you can see the colour variations, and you can just imagine how your box is going to look when you've got those two colours together. New South Wales sassafras. Who would have thought a yellow timber would look worse on a box? And it does look quite nice, particularly if you've got it next to coachwood or if you put it with silky oak. It looks quite nice, depending on where you use it, or if you just use it as a feature or a panel. Hue and pine, quite rare. Can't get too much of that around. You won't find very much of that around. It's quite rare and it's very expensive, but very soft. So it is quite nice to work with. I tend to use it as a feature. And then you start getting into the really fancy bits of timber. This one here is a piece of Blackheart Sassafras from Tasmania. Again, another rare timber, but so in that case what I do is I use it as a feature rather than actually making a whole box out of it. And of course the beautiful rose mahogany. Again, another really, really nice timber to use. Soft in its touch and quite good to use as a box. We're going to use some later down the track. I'm going to cut some for you anyway. So different types of timber. Now we'll go back to this other camera. If you're buying timber, when you go along, if you buy a big slab of timber, you're going to need the tools necessary to actually break the timber down. If you have the tools, good, you can do it. But if you can't, and you don't have the equipment, like a thicknesser or a table saw and the like, what you need to do is you need to ask your supplier to cut it for you and cut it to sizes that you can use. If you just have a drum sander in your workshop, you can buy timber that's a sort of regulation 10 mil or 12 mil thickness, depending on what size boxes you want to do. And you can just clean it up with the drum sander a little bit and make it nice and pretty. So when I have my timber, when I talk to my supplier, I ask my supplier to give me a 1 metre length, because I can cut anything out of that 1 metre. It's always 10 millimetres thick and upwards of 100 millimetres wide. Common size for box making, and you'll find that a lot of guys will cut it for you. It might cost you a little bit more, but give it a go and see what you can get, and you can get some really nice stuff. Now, the important thing about buying the timber is, earlier on I talked about the timber being quarter sawn or cut on the quarter, as people would say. Okay. How do I tell if it's been cut on the quarter? Well, let me tell you how the quarter hat starts. Here we go, Mr. Squiggle's back again. I'm going to try something different. I'm going to try the camera at the top there and see if that works. Okay, so there's my drawing board. All right. If I had a log, now a log would look like that, and then we cut the bits out of it. The grain would be here and so forth, and we cut the slabs out of it. Okay, this is what it looks like. Some people, lots of people ask me this question, so I'm going to go through it. Our focus is playing up. So if I had a piece of timber like so, and this is the pith and the summer growth, and basically they're the growth rings. So the most valuable piece of timber, or the most value timber cutters will have out of a timber, is to cut it to do a term they call live sawing. Okay, so live saw, and all that is cutting flitches, and they cut through the board, the timber, like so. So once you've cut through the timber like that, the only quarter sawn board in that is this one in the middle, where the grain runs across the board. Right. Now, quarter sawn timber gives you the most stable timber. Very little movement. Each of these slabs that has the grain running around the end, and it looks like this when you get the timber piece. It looks like this, it has the grain showing like so. It will cup in that direction, and it generally happens with live sawn timber. So you end up with a piece of timber that's actually got a bow in it, like that. Right? That doesn't work very well with your timber, because it's going to move depending on your weather conditions. Okay, so let's try something different here. No, I can't see that. Can't see that either. Here we go. We'll go back to where we were. Okay, so that's live sawn. Most common timber you will buy. And if you have a look at housing frames, you'll find that most of it is live sawn. The second technique is what we call back sawing. Again, same process. Only this time what they do is they cut the log in half. This half they'll live saw, all of that. And this half, they'll cut it this way, which will give you a little bit of grain showing in the timber, as I showed you in that piece of myrtle that I had there. Okay, you may cut a few this way. And that's called back sawing. Problem with that is you will not only get cupping in your board, but you will also get winding. And so it will twist one way and it will cup the other way. So you'll get a problem with that, and that's just a general rule. Some pieces might not work depending on the density of the timber. It may not happen. So your best bet is to buy what we call quarter sawn. Quarter sawn looks like this. Now, timber getters don't generally cut like this. It's a lot more work, a lot harder to do, and when you buy it, it's a lot more expensive. So the first thing they'll do is they will cut it in half like that. You'll have the pith there, and then you can see the grain goes across the boards, like so. The next cut will be through this way. And then they will cut a piece out there, and the grain again in this board is like so. And then they'll cut this way. Again, grain across the board. Then they'll start cutting in this way. Again, grain in the board, and then they'll cut this one out of here. And as you can see, there's a lot more work involved. The other thing that is, there's a lot more waste involved. So the price of the timber will go up. Okay, so very, very thin. So timber that's cut on the quarter is your best bet. And when you look at the piece of timber, when you look at the end grain, you will see the grain going across the piece of timber like that. It might be a little bit curved and so forth. And that's what your piece of timber will look like. The problem with that is you're going to lose any features because the grain is dead straight. I find that quite a nice effect on the boxes. So I will show you a piece of timber that's quarter sawn. This is that piece of camphor. If you look at that, you can see that the grain actually cuts across the piece of timber. So that's pretty close to quarter sawn. So that's what you want to be looking for when you buy your timber. All right. So that's that bit out of the way. So timber species, quite an important thing to think about when you're buying your timbers. Timber colour, you want to make sure that you've got colour that either complements itself or timber that fits together. When people talk about hardwood and softwood, the botanical terms that are used with hardwood and softwood, you'll find don't match your impression of what hardwood and softwood is. The botanical terminology that relates to softwoods and hardwoods. Softwoods are timbers that are basically conifers, things like radiata and the pines mostly. They're all things with needles on them. Generally hardwoods are deciduous trees. Okay, so that's just a rule of thumb that you can work with when you're coming to buying different types of timber. So anything that sort of deciduous drops its leaves, it's going to be all the oaks, for argument's sake. They also are hardwoods. Okay, some are harder than others. If you've got English oak or pin oak, forest oak, really hard. Now even silky oak is quite hard, and but it's soft enough to work with best of things. Now I just want to show you another piece. This is a piece of lace she oak. Okay, it's an oak. Just get a pencil. And all oaks are like this. If you look at this little thing here, this little shape here, that's what we call a medullary ray. Now they go sideways through the timber, and they are food storage for the tree. Okay, and they transfer from the outside to the inside of the tree. Only oaks have that. Okay, eucalypts have a different way of doing things, but I don't want to get into that because that's, again, a very technical botanical side of it that takes years to sort of work out. There are some guys around who can actually sprout off the botanical name for most of the timbers and trees that you see around. I'm not one of them, so it's quite difficult. I just find that I've got a sort of a stock set of timbers, and when I find something that's different, I have a little play with it, I work it out, try and sort of figure out what to do with it. So that's what we're going to do with the timbers. Okay, so goodbye Mr. Squiggle for the moment. Now next thing to do is to start looking at cutting up the timber. So when you've chosen your timber, and I've chosen some silver ash and a piece of rose mahogany for my box. Now how do we cut this up and how do we work out the size? Now it's quite difficult to work out what sizes. I get asked that question all the time. People come to me and say, what's the dimensions of that box? What's the dimensions of that box? Tell me what they are so that I can make the same box. I sort of stop and think, surely you should be able to work out what sizes the boxes are or what size box you want. Okay, it's an individual thing. Copying somebody else is always a good indictment on somebody's work, but surely you can make up your own mind. Now, the two ways of doing it that I find really, really easy. Grab yourself a piece of A4 paper. Here's a piece of A4. Okay. So a piece of A4 paper. When you look at that piece of A4 paper, don't watch the writing on it, but when you look at that A4 piece of paper, it's a regulation normal size that we see every day. It's 295 millimetres by 210 millimetres. Okay, that's the size of the piece of paper. If you don't want your box that big, take a measurement off the side of it. So say for argument's sake, take 20 millimetres off, you cut it off, cut that piece of paper off, and then do the same on the side. And what you will have is something that was relatively even. Okay, so start with your piece of paper, make it smaller. If you want to add some more to it. So we can go to the bit bigger. Now, the golden rule is generally, somebody said to me, don't you use the golden rule? I do sometimes, but not all the time, because I find that visually I like things a particular way, and you'll find the same thing. So if you want to work with the golden rule, the rectangle golden rule, and this is what the golden rule is. If you have a piece of, but I'll I'll get back Mr. Squiggle. The golden rule, got to focus him yet, is for furniture is a rectangle, is rectangular. So golden rule ratio. What we have is 1 equals 1.618. All right. So to get your length, you multiply 1 by 1.618, or whatever that measurement is. So let's say, for argument's sake, Pammy, I might get you to show me off, pass me my phone. You know, maths was never my. So, say for argument's sake, we wanted want to work by the golden rule, and we wanted, say, this side here from there to there, we wanted that say 110 wide or 120 wide. Okay, all we do is multiply that by 1.6. So if we go 120 times 1.618, that means that our length in the golden rule will be 190 or 194. It's 0.16, but I would just go 194. Okay, and that gives you your golden rule measurement. Okay, so if you want to work that out, it's 1 times 1.618, and that's your golden rule. Okay, ratio. Sorry, I better put that on there. Golden ratio. So it's your golden rule ratio. So for furniture. So think about that when you're, it looks a bit rough. Take that off. And that's what you'll end up with. And then you can work out your measurements from there. Okay? So that's what that's how that's worked out. So Mr. Squiggle can go back in his corner. And sometimes I use that, sometimes I don't. But it's always a good one to have in the back of your mind when you're doing it. So now what I want to do is I want to show you what I do with the timber. So the first thing I do with the timber, once I've got my piece of timber, I'll have a piece like this. Okay, so I'll have a piece like this, and then I'll choose the inside of my box. Okay, so all I'm going to do is use this piece. So I'll sand that down to 800 grit sandpaper. And as I've said right through the beginning of all of my work, is I'll sand the inside of the boxes so that I don't have to fiddle around trying to sort of get my fingers tucked into little corners sanding. So we keep that in mind all the time. When I'm sanding, I use my Merker. So I'll just give you a little demo as to what I do. If I put this up here, I'm going to go to my camera there, and I'll just pick up a piece of, say for argument's sake, this bit. I've got my Merker sitting over here. Everything's turned on. Now, when I'm doing with the Merker, what I'm doing with the Merker is I've got my little square one. You can see that little square one. I start with the 180. What I'll do is I'll run the material through the drum sander first, get it down to relatively smooth and flat, and then I'll go over it with this one. So it's just a matter of I'm not going to bore you with a whole lot of sanding technique. But you can see, I don't know if you can see that, but you can see that what I did there is really, really smooth compared to what's happening on this end of the board. You can see this end's quite rough. So just doing that gets it nice and smooth. Okay, so go through the whole process down to 80 grit, to 800 grit, and you'll end up with a nice, clean, almost shiny surface on the piece of timber. This is going to be the end of my box, and this is going to be the front and back. Okay, now measurements. We're going to cut. Shift that out of the way. So what I did earlier is I dressed up the end of it nice and square. So what I want to do is I want to measure my box. Now, before I start cutting material for the box, I do this. Just it lets you into something that I do if I'm sitting around doing very little, is I have a sketchbook. And I sketch things. What does that remind you of? That's the little pencil box. So, and there's my little secrets box. So I sketch things and I make notes. And there's my desktop box. And I make the notes, cutting lists and so forth. Plenty of room under here to make any other notes as I'm working. And then we get into things like the trinket box. Okay, so just little sketches, sitting down, might be having lunch, might be having a cup of tea, and come up with some different ideas. And then I get into making the componentry that goes on the box, the panelled lids, the little keepers and so forth. So I do all sorts of different things, different style of box, different style of lid, and so on. And just little sketches. So I come up with different ideas, and that's our little document box. So that's what happens. Then I transfer it to something in the workshop when I'm ready. You can see that, when I'm ready to start cutting. I've got all my measurements on there. I've got some little notes there of things that I need to do, and it just keeps me informed as to what I want to do. And then when I finish that one, I'll just sand it, rub it off, and then I'll put on the next one. And I keep that around pretty close most of the time. Okay, so I've got my measurements and everything set up. Okay, so that'll sit there. Now, cutting. When we cut, the first thing that you need to do is dress up one edge of the board. This one here has been dressed down, it's perfectly flat. You can put it in the vise and plane it. You can take it to your drums, to your linisher, and just sand it flat on your linisher. But you'll need a flat surface on one edge at least. This one here, I've done the back edge of that. So now all I need to do is my measurements. I've got my inside. I'm going to put all my markings on the outside. Where's my ruler? So my measurements, 250 by 160. So this one's going to be 250. Put a mark there. Grab my trusty square. And on the worked side, which is that side there, is where I'll do my marking from. Now, if you were doing a box out of the one piece where you had the grain running around the box, I've cut a long piece. The next piece you cut off there is going to be a short piece, a long piece, and then your short piece. So that you need them all to flow through. That's the simple way. There's another way of doing it, which I'm not going to go into, but you can do it by splitting the timber apart, but we'll leave that. So that measurement is all I need on there. The next one, again, I've squared up the end of that. I've got my flat face there. My measurement for this piece is 160. So if I measure to 160, back with my trusty square, and they're the only markings I need to do. All right, check it. 160, 250, and we're over to the saw. Now all my cutting for my boxes, because they're quite small, I can do them quite accurately with my drop saw. I need to stop. Turn the light on. Now you'll notice, I don't know if you can see it on the screen, just here I have a laser beam. I'm moving a millimetre to the right of my mark so that I'm making my piece of timber longer than I need it. Just a tiny little bit longer. And you can see I've cut just a little bit longer. This one. When I cut my second one, I'll sit the first one on top of it, make sure I'm square on the ends, and then I'll dock. And I've got two pieces of timber that are exactly the same size. Same applies to this one. Cut it a millimetre longer than I need it. Sit this on top of here. How are we going with the comments, Pemmy?
Yeah, good.
Just got to make sure that that's square on the end and flush. I'll block those off. Now what I have here is I've got two offcuts. I've got this piece and this piece. I'm going to use those to do my test joint. Hopefully we'll get that done today, or we may not. I'll get this all cut up anyway and ready to go. So our width is, for the ends, is 97 millimetres, and that's 10 millimetres longer, 10 millimetres wider than the front and the back. Our lid's going to be 10 millimetre lid. So 97. I sit that there. Now there's a chance that that's going to move out of the way, so I'll shift that one. And I have another board. I want them square. Piece of timber in there. Dress that up to 97. Clamp this in place. If I was cutting lots of boards, I would end up with and there we have the two end pieces of the board. Two edges. I've got to make sure I've got the dressed side. these are going to be 87, so they're a little smaller. Now the reason I chose 87 is because it fits best on the jig to give me an even layout of joints. Is that a question that's been asked so far?
No.
Oh, there you go.
I'm just happy watching. I'm happy to watch.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, so that wasn't that hard, was it? And that's given me, let's go back to here, that's given me my two end pieces and my front and back of the box. So the box is going to look like that. And as you can see, I've got a 10mm step at the top of the box. So that's what the box is going to look like. This one's quite a big one. It's actually a little bit bigger than what I would normally do, okay? But because I'm going to put a lot more joints on there just to show you how it all works and how it all fits together best. Okay, so that's what we're going to try and do. And I have 10 minutes, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up for my test cuts, and I need a jig. So again, A10, I've scrubbed it all out, made it nice and clean. I've changed the boards. I've changed the backing boards, because the last backing boards we used were different sizes and they'd all been chopped up, so good idea to do that regularly. Keep checking to see that everything's right. Now, I'm just doing a test joint, so that's all I need to worry about. So if I set my piece of timber, you can see that there. If I set my piece of timber nice and even, this is how it's going to look. Now, as you can see, I'm using the material that I would normally use to make the box. This one here, you can actually see that it's really nicely quarter sawn. The lines are straight across it. So it's just going to be a test joint. Put it in place, shift the tool. Put a clamp in place. Okay, so I've locked it all in place, not going to go anywhere. And as I said, it is a test joint. So first thing I do is give my dovetail bit a scrub, like so. Just clean it up. Tiny little bit of oil on the bearing. I need dovetails first. Just spanner. Like so. And adjust the height. As I have always said, right from the word go, use the material that you're cutting, use the piece of material that's going to fit into there as your height adjuster. if you look very, very carefully, you'll find that this material is 0.5 millimetre thinner than that one there. So the edges are a little bit, tiny bit thicker. So, and remember, this is a test joint, so it's not critical that you actually make it 0.5 millimetre. But we do want to get it pretty close. I've got 5 minutes, so I should be able to cut. Can I have a pair of earmuffs, please, Penny? Thank you.
How's the cutting table attached for the capex?
Screwed down through the middle.
Right.
Screwed down through the middle onto the slot, and I've also got screws into the back of the top support. Who was asking that question?
I think Derek.
Derek.
Derek Clark.
Yeah, Derek. Just screws into the back of the backboard on the capex and through the middle. But it's quite a solid table.
Very solid.
Forgot to tell you, ears down. Okay, so there we have our cut joint. The next one, turn the jig around, we'll cut the other one. I'm going to go over a little bit today, so bear with me. You'll notice that I cut both of those pieces of timber the same width. This is for test cut purposes. I hope you've enjoyed today. I had a lot to get through, and lots of little bits of information that a lot of people don't actually pass on. What they do is they sort of forget about it and they just keep it to themselves, and until somebody asks them the question. And unfortunately, we don't get enough time to actually go through a lot of the techniques and things like that. So I hope I've given you some sort of help when it comes to choosing your timber and looking at the sizes of your boxes. Ears down, people. Okay, so nice and clean. Let's see if it fits. So,
Yeah.
You couldn't ask for better. That just went in so well. So, very nice, clean, perfect fit. So I don't need to do any adjusting whatsoever to get that joint to work properly. Okay, so the box is going to look really, really nice. So at least we've cut the joints. Now what I want to do is I just want to give you all a farewell because we're done for the day. Dave Stanton's on very shortly. He's using dominoes to cut solid timber and edging it to melamine board, so that could be interesting. He's also doing a bit of hand planing to do some flush work, flush trimming. And starting the, I think he's starting the hopper for the quilting table. But he's also got a giveaway. So it's an Australian-wide thing for a bandsaw guide. So you might want to click on that, you might win yourself something. So that should be it. So it'll be good to see. Now, all I can say now is stay well. Next week we're going to cut the joints for the box frame, and we might be able to get a few other little things done, like setting up for the lid. I haven't talked about the lid, but we will get into that down the track. Okay, so that's going to be another thing all on its own. So stay well, everybody. Keep your chisel sharp, and I'll see you all next week. Okay, so if you like what you saw, please, a couple of thumbs up wouldn't be a bad idea. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do, and we'll keep you reasonably entertained. Or at least I hope I have today. Some of that information, it tends to be on the boring side, but hey, it's something we need to have a bit of background in. Okay, so stay well, everybody, and I will see you all